In 1967, the sugar industry paid Harvard scientists $6,500 to lie about what was killing you. And guys, it worked. Every low-fat yogurt you've eaten, every healthy cereal you picked off the shelf, every time you grabbed margarine instead of butter, those choices, they weren't yours. They were engineered by an industry that literally bought the science. Since those guidelines dropped in 1980, Americans got fatter and sicker than any generation before them. So was that incompetence? Or was that the plan all along? By the end of this, you'll know exactly who paid whom, who got destroyed for telling the truth, and why the same playbook is being used on you right now. And the man who ran Sugar's disinformation campaign, he transferred to Big Tobacco and brought the playbook with him. But first, how did we fall for it? It started with a heart attack in the White House, 1955. President Eisenhower has a massive heart attack. The whole nation panics, and no one talks about this part. The man was smoking 4 packs of cigarettes a day. 4 packs. But did America blame tobacco? No, America blamed butter. Okay, so into this panic steps a University of Minnesota pathologist named Ancel Keys. Keys had a theory: saturated fat raises cholesterol. Cholesterol clogs your arteries. Clogged arteries kill you. Clean, simple, terrifying. By 1961, the American Heart Association officially tells every American to cut saturated fat, and they put Keys on the board. His hypothesis wasn't just a theory anymore, it was doctrine. But it was never uncontested. A biostatistician named Jacob Yerushalmi published a paper in 1957 questioning whether fat actually caused heart disease, and Keys didn't address the data. He attacked Yerushalmi in print, dismissed him, moved on. Because Ancel Keys didn't win debates with evidence, he won them with personality and institutional power. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Keys had been quietly receiving sugar industry funding since 1944, 2 decades before the famous Harvard payment. The man championing the idea that fat was killing America had sugar money in his pocket from the beginning. So was the scientific consensus on fat earned through rigorous evidence? Not exactly. The 1980 dietary guidelines relied, according to researchers, almost exclusively on epidemiological data, correlations, not controlled trials proving causation. Nobody had actually proved that cutting fat would save a single life. In 1964, the Sugar Research Foundation's John Yudkin circulated an internal memo proposing to embark on a major program to refute our detractors. They had their strategy. Now they needed a weapon. But there was one scientist who saw through the fat hypothesis. He had the data, he had the credentials, he published the warning, and for it, they destroyed him. 1972, John Yudkin, chair of nutrition at Queen Elizabeth College, London, published a book called Pure, White, and Deadly. His warning was blunt. Sugar, not fat, was the primary driver of heart disease, obesity, and diabetes. And this wasn't speculation. Yudkin tested sugar on rodents, chickens, rabbits, pigs, and human subjects. Every single model showed the same thing: raised triglycerides and elevated insulin. He identified that fructose puts extra strain on the liver, which converts it directly to fat, triggering metabolic syndrome. Modern science confirmed every one of these mechanisms. Decades later, Yudkin even predicted that sooner or later, legislation will be needed to prevent people from consuming so much sucrose. He said that in 1972. The UK implemented a sugar tax in 2018. 46 years later, the man was practically writing policy from the future. Honestly, reading his work now is eerie. He saw everything coming. But Ancel Keys, the man with undisclosed sugar funding, published a tax calling Yudkin's evidence flimsy before the book even appeared. A preemptive strike, and it wasn't just criticism. The sugar industry and processed food manufacturers directly interfered with Yudkin's research and publication. He documented it himself in the final chapters of his own book, example after example of how his work had been impeded. Yudkin could have stayed quiet. He could have published on safer topics and kept his reputation intact. Instead, he staked his entire career on warning the public. It cost him everything. When he served on the UK government's expert panel on diet and heart disease, his own colleagues rejected his arguments. He was reduced to submitting a lone note of reservation suggesting they had paid too much attention to fat and too little to sucrose. One voice against an entire institution captured by industry money. It took 37 years. In 2009, pediatric endocrinologist Robert Lustig delivered a lecture called Sugar, the Bitter Truth, hailing Yudkin's work as prophetic. The book was republished about 3 years later, more than 35 years after it first appeared. By then, 2 generations had eaten according to the lie Yudkin tried to expose. And the man who took sugar money in 1967 to write the fraudulent Harvard Review, Mark Hegstead, he didn't just write a paper. He went on to help design the official dietary guidelines that told 300 million Americans what to eat. So what happened when 300 million Americans actually followed those guidelines? In 1980, the first U.S. dietary guidelines told the country to eat 7 to 11 servings of bread daily, get 50 to 55% of calories from carbohydrates, and avoid too much fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol. The nation obeyed. One critical detail was missing: what to eat instead of fat. The food industry answered that question for us. Nabisco launched Snackwell's cookies in 1992, timed perfectly with the food pyramid's release. The devil's food variety was completely fat-free. It became so popular, it created supermarket shortages. People were stalking delivery trucks, literally following cookie trucks through parking lots, because nothing says public health triumph like a nationwide cookie frenzy. Low-fat products tripled between 1992 and the mid-90s, and every single one of them had a dirty secret: fat was replaced with sugar. Wait, how much sugar? Snackwell's vanilla creme cookies contained 17 grams of sugar per serving. A Snickers bar? 20 grams. They were 3 grams away from candy and calling it a health food. Reduced fat Oreos had 10 fewer calories than regular Oreos. 10. That's not a health improvement, that's a rounding error. And food scientists knew exactly what they were doing. They deliberately engineered these products to look like a real cookie, not a diet cracker, and taste indulgent enough that people wouldn't feel punished. The health halo was the point. Make it feel virtuous. Make it taste sinful. Sell billions. The Snackwell's effect became an actual term in psychology literature. People ate way more of products labeled low-fat because they believed larger quantities were safe. Michael Pollan nailed it. If one Snackwell's is okay because it's low-fat, a whole box is probably better. The results were catastrophic. Obesity rose from 15% to 42%, diabetes tripled. Harvard nutritionist David Ludwig called it a failed experiment. The exact diseases the guidelines promised to prevent exploded during the era Americans followed them most faithfully. The nation followed advice written by a man on the sugar industry's payroll. Fat was removed, sugar was added, and 2 generations got sicker than any in human history. But this wasn't just a historical mistake. The playbook that corrupted 1967 science and 1980 policy didn't retire. It got promoted. You might think this is a cautionary tale from a less regulated era. It isn't. Dr. Robert Hockett ran the Sugar Research Foundation's disinformation campaign in the 1940s and 50s. In 1954, he transferred to the Tobacco Industry Research Committee and brought his tactics and his favorite scientists, Keyes and Stair, with him. Read that again. Sugar didn't copy tobacco's playbook. Sugar wrote it, and it never stopped working. In 2016, it came out that Coca-Cola funded something called the Global Energy Balance Network, a research group pushing the idea that lack of exercise, not diet, drives obesity. Coca-Cola shaped the group's mission and registered its website. Same tactic, same deflection, blame behavior, protect the product. 6 decades later, not a single thing had changed. Food industry groups spent over $77 million lobbying Congress in 2014 and 2015 on dietary guidelines alone. The 2015 Advisory Committee recommended diets lower in red and processed meats and low in sugar-sweetened drinks, evidence-based, peer-reviewed. And those recommendations were just deleted from the final guidelines after lobbying by pork producers, cattlemen's associations, and soft drink manufacturers. Real talk, they spent $77 million to edit a government document, and it worked. Then there's the revolving door. Former SNAC international lobbyist Kaylee Tkach, who had lobbied on those same dietary guidelines, took a position at the USDA helping shape the very policy she'd been paid to influence from outside. The fox didn't just guard the henhouse, the fox wrote the building codes. And in 2025, researchers discovered the sugar industry had also manipulated fluoride, science promoting fluoride to avoid recommending sugar reduction for tooth decay, steering the American Dental Association away from sugar limits. They didn't just corrupt heart disease science, they corrupted everything they touched. Which means every piece of the puzzle is now in place. Now step back, look at what you know. The fat hypothesis was always contested, built on correlations, not proof. The sugar industry paid $6,500 to amplify one side of a real debate that tipped the scientific consensus. The consensus shaped the guidelines. The guidelines told Americans to replace fat with carbohydrates. The food industry replaced fat with sugar. Obesity tripled, diabetes tripled. The one scientist who warned us was destroyed for 37 years. And the man who ran the disinformation campaign carried the playbook to tobacco, and today it runs through every food lobby in Washington. A $50,000 payment didn't just buy a fraudulent paper, it bought the diet of an entire civilization. And yes, that payment helped create the worst obesity and diabetes epidemics in human history. Not through a single paper, but through a chain reaction. The 1967 review reinforced the consensus that fat, not sugar, caused heart disease. That consensus shaped the 1980 Dietary Guidelines. Those guidelines created the low-fat product explosion. And the low-fat products replaced fat with sugar, driving a health catastrophe we're still living through. The cost wasn't $50,000. Diabetes now kills approximately 3.4 million people every year worldwide. It's projected to affect 780 million people by 2045. Global diabetes spending exceeded $966 billion in 2021 alone. And Frederick Stair's Harvard Nutrition Department, by 1990, it had received tens of millions of dollars from 17 sugar industry organizations and 145 additional companies in processed food, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals. This wasn't one corrupt payment. It was systematic institutional capture over decades. But this is what modern research actually shows, and this might be the most important thing in this entire story. The whole fat versus sugar framing, it was a false binary. Healthy low-fat diets and healthy low-carb diets both reduce mortality. Unhealthy versions of either increase it. What actually matters is diet quality, whole foods versus processed products, not which single macronutrient to fear. The sugar industry's greatest trick wasn't making you fear fat, it was making you think nutrition was about avoiding one villain, when it was always about the quality of everything you eat. Every label that says low fat or reduced fat is a monument to the 1967 fraud. Every health halo product engineered for compulsive consumption uses the same playbook. Your job isn't to swap fat fear for sugar fear, it's to recognize when an industry is choosing your diet for you and to demand that science, not lobbying, shapes what you eat. In 1972, John Yudkin wrote that sugar was pure, white, and deadly. He was right about everything. It took 37 years for anyone to listen. The question isn't whether you've been manipulated by the food industry. The question is whether you're still being manipulated right now. And if this changed how you think about what's on your plate, share it with someone who still believes low fat means healthy.